Hey everybody, welcome to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we are podcasting today from sunny and warm Florida, USA.
Well, and that's unusual for us because we're not from Florida.
From the northeast of the United States.
Yeah.
And for our international listeners, U.S. listeners will know where we are, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, in the southeast of the U.S.
Yeah, well, our usual domicile is in western Pennsylvania, which has been just friggin' so cold this winter.
Minus 15 most days for like a month straight.
Yeah.
Crazy cold.
I used to live in Anchorage, Alaska. I lived in Alaska for 4 winters, and it's been Alaska weather. It's been Anchorage weather. And I thought I left it, but I didn't. I ended up back in Alaska weather, but in Pennsylvania.
I do have to say this has been a particularly cold winter in the Northeast.
It's been ridiculous.
But we're almost out of it, and we're
anyway,
in Florida, so we're happy right now.
We're happy because we took a vacation to Florida, and we spent the last week in Disney World with our daughter, Piper, who's 19 months old.
Yeah.
So it's her second visit, and the reason why it's her second visit is because neither of us are strangers to Disney. You grew up on the East Coast going to Disney World. And you grew up on the West Coast going to Disneyland.
Yeah. So we have our respective Disney experiences as little kids. So it's nostalgic for us. So
yeah.
When you have a 19-year-old daughter who is madly in love.
19-month-old.
19-month-old. Wow. I'm moving really fast.
19 years old.
19-month-old daughter who's massively in love with Winnie the Pooh. You have to go and make a quick visit to Walt Disney World.
Oh, off the charts in love with Winnie the Pooh.
So being at Disney, we noticed some things we thought we'd talk about on the podcast today. Kind of just free-form conversation about some things and some models and ways of looking at people and what Disney does down there. It's really interesting to see.
Well, while we were walking through Magic Kingdom, there was a couple things that really jumped out at us. Because our brains never stop even when we're on vacation. Everything is so interesting to break down and recreate and
dissect.
Dissect. And one of the things we were noticing is, seriously, maybe 100 to 200 feet outside of the park, Joel just kind of did this overly friendly, "Hey, how's it going?" to a group of people who were staying at one of the Disney World resorts. And they acted like he was a complete and total nut job. They acted like he was a total nutter butter. And then when we got inside the park, just a couple hundred feet into the park, he does the same thing. "Hey, how's it going?" And everybody acts like that's totally normal inside the park. Once you enter the park gates, suddenly over happy, super exuberant greetings,
very friendly,
are now just a part of the experience.
Well, I did this on purpose, actually. I wanted to see what would happen because the day before we were there and people were on the train. They're like, "Hey," waving to complete strangers.
Total strangers.
I thought, what would happen outside without the music and the themes, and we're just kind of on a normal walkway. There were some people walking toward us. I thought, what would happen if I just kind of really boisterously did the same thing that people were doing inside the park? What would happen?
Right.
And sure enough, it played out how I kind of expected it to play out outside the park, which was a little bit like, whoa, this guy's like a weirdo.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that we're not, way outside the park. We're not in, the city of Orlando or Kissimmee. I mean, we're still in the Disney World resort area. So it's not like we've removed ourselves completely from, Disney World. But it was interesting that it wasn't enough in the park for people to, be put at ease. And we were asking ourselves, what is it about being inside the park? Why are people inside the park so willing to wave at strangers, have super happy looks on their faces? What is the magic of the park? I mean, are you paying $100 a day for the privilege of being exuberantly happy with strangers?
Yeah.
So what's the deal? And some interesting conversations got spawned from that, I think.
There's actually a lot of writing about this in Disney lore. They call it being inside the Berm. There's this especially at Disneyland, because Disneyland was built first in 1955, and Disney World came later in 1971. But they call it being inside the Berm. There's this mound of dirt that surrounds the park that actually the train runs on. There's a train surrounding the entire park of Disneyland. And it's a mound of dirt that they say when you're inside the mound of dirt, it's called being inside the berm of Disneyland or Disney World. And it's kind of this magical place you transport into, and Disney kind of this in mind when he created it. They also call Disneyland and Disney World there's a phrase that's called the architecture of reassurance. People feeling like safe and comfortable. The architecture itself, the way it's laid out, the staff taking care of all your needs, everything just kind of handled, makes you feel very reassured and comfortable and safe, like everything's handled. So you can almost, you have abundance of emotion to be able to wave and smile and be friendly to people, basically, because all of your basic needs are kind of met inside this Berm idea. So there's a lot of writing about this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, and you were telling me, because you've done a lot more research on Disney than I have. You were really into Disney lore and understanding how the parks worked and the creative element of Disney. So you're leagues ahead of me in information about Disney World. I just grew up around Disneyland, and I remember going there a lot, but I don't have nearly as much information as you do. So one of the things that you told me that was so interesting is that I don't know who was complaining about it, like which part of park management was complaining about it at Disneyland, but people kept walking through grass to try to get from one land to the other.
I think it was near the castle at Disneyland, near the front end of the castle. There was like a little grassy area. They were walking through to take a shortcut from one of the lands, I think Tomorrowland, into the castle area. So they were cutting across the grass and beating it down. So it was all dirt there.
Right, and the people who were in charge of, maintaining lawns or maintaining the grounds were really frustrated by this because they couldn't keep people off the grass. And so when this came to, Walt Disney's attention, as opposed to, doubling down on preventing people from making the shortcut, Disney said, well, just make a path there. If that's where people are organically, naturally traveling, then create a path and make the landscape go around that path. So what's so interesting about that is there was the part of the architecture of reassurance, it seems to me, is that there's also sort of this organic nature, like if this is what you want to be doing, if this is your natural way of traveling, well, we're going to accommodate that. We're not going to resist you. We're not going to try to create an environment or a landscape of resistance. We're going to create a landscape of accommodation. And if this is how you're naturally traveling, well, then we'll help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Disney would do this all the time. He'd go down into the park during the day, disguised, usually with sunglasses and a hat on, because he was famous by this point, in the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. He would go down and he would have lunch in the park. He'd walk around. He would observe guests and how they would move through the park. He would observe how people responded to different attractions and rides and constantly be making improvements. And he'd get so angry with his staff if they would leave and go out to lunch somewhere else in Anaheim or in Los Angeles and have lunch or go away for a meal or something. He said, go into the park, have a meal, sit down, observe the guests, talk to guests, find out what they like, find out what they don't like, and let's try to make the experience better and better and better every day for our guests. And so he would push his staff to do this and push himself to do this constantly and get tons of feedback, get inside the mind and heart space of the people that were coming to his parks. To try to understand what they were wanting and wanting to do.
Yeah. Well, what's so interesting about that for me is that I mentioned this or a couple days ago when we were in Disney World. I don't remember if we were Magic Kingdom or Epcot at the time, but I remember just looking around thinking people are so quote unquote happy, right? Like I don't know what these people's lives are when they go back home. They're on vacation, so obviously they're going to take a bump up in exuberance and feeling good. But I think one of the reasons why people are so open to each other, that's the other thing, like we're on the train and there's other people on the People Mover in Magic Kingdom and we're waving to each other like, oh my gosh, I'm in Magic Kingdom. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in Magic Kingdom too, right? And they're like waving, we're waving at each other and we don't know each other and we're not going to see each other again in the park, or not that we would recognize. But for that moment, we're like totally connecting that we're in the same really awesome space. And what was so interesting to me is I think the reason why everyone is open to having that kind of relationship is that they have what I call Maslow's basement needs met. So I heard this phrase from a friend of mine, Maslow's basement needs, but this goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can, if you're not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can Google it right now. Just put in Maslow, Maslow, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Abraham Maslow.
Right, and this is based on the work of Abraham Maslow. And you'll find a triangle. The triangle will have 5 different lines in it and 5 different little spots for what basically are the essential needs that all human beings have. What's interesting about the hierarchy of needs, though, is that you cannot graduate to the next need up until you get the need below it met, and that's why it's a hierarchy. That's why it is in stages. So at the very bottom, if you're unable to look it up, at the very bottom is the need called survival, and this is the need to have your basic survival needs met. So food, sleep, air, sex, like all the things that are just a human being's basic need. And then on top of that, once you get your survival needs met, which is, you're going to make it through the day, then a person gets bumped up into safety and security. And safety and security is the need to feel like, okay, not only am I going to survive today, but I'm going to survive long range. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to, continually go out and be hunter-gatherer and kill my prey every day. I have an established domicile, a habitat, and a way of continually getting my resources, my basic resources met. So for the modern day world, I have a house or an apartment. I'm making my rent. I know that I can, cover
A steady job.
I have a steady job. I can cover food every month. I can feed my kids, right? That's safety and security. I know that I'm in a country, well, at least in Western cultures or first world countries, you know that people aren't going to just kind of come into your house and steal your stuff, at any given moment. And if that's a worry for you, you can install, protective needs, like security systems. So once you have your safety and security needs met, then you graduate onto what's called love and belongingness needs. And these are relationship needs. This can be your relationship with your spouse, or it can be your relationship with friends or family. It can be relationship with coworkers. It's basically knowing that you're loved and that, the tribe isn't going to kick you out, right? Like you're safe on a relationship level. And then when you feel that need is fully met, you graduate onto what's called self-esteem. And so this is when you make goals for yourself, long-range goals, you involve yourself in projects, and you feel like you're going to get to the next level of your life. And then once that need is met, and then you graduate onto what's called self-actualization, and this is frequently spiritual work, transcendent work.
Legacy.
This is legacy. This is when you get to the highest level of human need, which usually has to do with, expanded consciousness and growing and evolving yourself as a human being, as an individual. So what's interesting about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that it's really prescriptive for when you're having difficulty with, say, your spouse, right? Like if you guys are fighting all the time, how people say, they say that you fight the most about in-laws, money, and sex. Well, at least the money and sex part are needs that are underneath love and belongingness, right? Money is usually a safety and security need, and sex generally goes under a survival need. So if you're not getting your lower needs met, if you're not getting your survival needs or your safety and security needs, then you're not going to have the emotional or mental real estate to allocate to love and belongingness. Like you're never going to get your relationship problems settled because you're still worried about the lower rung down, which is safety and security and or survival. So it's a really interesting model for sort of understanding, if you've got this chronic problem and you can't seem to solve the problem, it's generally that the problem doesn't necessarily lay right there with what is, the obvious need going unmet. You might have a need going unmet that is a lower rung on Maslow's hierarchy that needs to be addressed first, and then you can graduate to the need that is more obvious. Like, I'm not getting along with my spouse. Well, first we need to make sure that we can pay the bills, right, and get our safety and security needs met, and then we can graduate to working on the issue between, myself and my spouse. So, anyway, the reason why I went through all of that is it felt like in Disney, it's the one time when you're hanging out where everybody has survival, safety, and security needs met, right?
Yeah, and from our observation, from we've noticed, most people, it seems like, live in those first three. They're somewhere in those first three, and they're moving up and down, and they're flowing around those first three, which is survival, safety and security, love and belongingness. And it seems like, from my observation, and I think you'd probably agree with me, Antonia, is that most people are never able to break free from those three. They're kind of almost held captive in what you've called Maslow's basement needs, those first three needs. And they're, at any given time, trying to address or trying to get one of those or multiple of those needs met. And, it's like they finally get the love and belongingness, and now the safety security goes away, or they get safety security and now they don't have a love of their life, or there's something going on where they don't have all of those met at any given time.
Yeah.
In order to move into self-esteem and self-actualization, they're always kind of stuck in this holding pattern.
Yeah.
I notice for a lot of people this is the case.
Yeah, I would agree. It does seem like people feel very stuck in those basement needs. What's so interesting about being in Disney is that it's like the one time where you are in abundance. It's not just that your needs are being handled. It's not like your survival needs are being, just barely met. It's not that your safety and security needs are being just barely met. Like, you're in abundance when you're in that context. Yeah. Like, people are on vacation. Well, they've been saving up and or maybe putting it on a credit card, but at least for the moment, they feel like they're in abundance.
Well, and the other interesting thing is it's one of the few contexts where not only are you in abundance, but pretty much 99% of the people around you are in abundance.
Yes.
Because you might be in your normal neighborhood back home. You might have all of your Maslow needs met. You might be in self-actualization. But there's the neighbors across the street who are just barely able to hang on. They're going to be foreclosed in their house.
Right.
So the people around you aren't in abundance. So this is a place where you're in abundance and the people around you are in abundance across the board.
Yeah, and so the energy of everything just kind of goes up.
Yeah.
And so because everybody is in abundance, there's no need for stinginess. When it comes to love and belongingness, there's no need to not just wave and say hi. Like, there's no need to feel like a greeting or your personal energy or friendliness is somehow scarce and it can only be allocated towards those that you know and love and are special in your life. There's an abundance of this. So that's where the exuberance comes from. That's where the high energy comes from. And it's absolutely fascinating that one person and his vision, and then the people around him who helped make the vision happen. It's amazing that somebody could create that environment.
Yeah.
Express to us what it would look like if the world was in abundance. Like, what would the world look like if everybody had their survival needs met and their safety and security needs met? It would look like Disneyland.
And this is what Disney in the 1960s, before he died in December of 1966. He was in the middle of working on something called the Environmental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, which was a city that he was going to design, him and his engineers and artists and program, people that were his creative core, create an actual city from scratch, because he had lived in the Los Angeles area as a film producer his whole life, and he hated the idea of urban sprawl. He hated the idea of the automobile putting out emissions in the air. He wanted public transit. He thought, Los Angeles was this smoggy, sprawling, urban, yucky mark on the earth, in a sense, and he thought, I can correct this by building a model that will illustrate to the world how people's base needs can be met. We can lower emissions, we can have public transit, we can have great entertainment and culture and lifestyle. Now, obviously Disney had a very specific vision of what all that would look like, because it was to his taste, but the vision was there, and he obviously died before he ever got the chance to realize this, but he was planning this city in Florida, in central Florida, to try to build from scratch, to illustrate to the world how a city could function if it was planned and it was designed to be able to take care of people's base needs on the whole level, as an actual functioning city, not just a theme park for 1 or 2 days, but actually everyday experience. This is what his vision was for the future.
That's what ended up becoming Epcot, right?
Yeah, it ended up being a theme park, Epcot, which was a lesser version of what he had in mind. But if you ever Google Disney's Project X or Disney's original Epcot city plans, he's got different videos that he had put out for television and all different promotions, and you can kind of get a sense of what he was envisioning, almost like a utopian type place. And it was an experiment. He called it an experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Didn't know if it would work or not, but he had this vision of a city that would be able to do exactly what the theme parks have done, is get everybody up to a certain level of having their needs met and see what would happen. And he was envisioning doing that through corporate sponsorships and having a lot of, access to jobs and progress and, all these different things. So he was going to use capitalism to do it in a specific way. We've never seen that vision realized how Disney envisioned it.
Yeah.
Except in his theme parks. And we can see it on a micro scale for a short period of time, like what we're talking about, people's needs getting met. I think it's a fascinating study
Yeah.
and how people behave when not only themselves but those around them are taken care of.
Yeah, well, and I was trying to think of a modern day version of this. I mean, beyond just a theme park, but actually bringing it into, say, the corporate, corporate America or the corporate world. And, we did some work with Zappos a couple different times. We did work with Zappos Insights and then Zappos themselves. We did some profiling for a few of their departments.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting, we got to know Tony Hsieh a bit. And it was really interesting to see this sort of the germination of it, and then now it's actually being realized. But Tony Hsieh is a person who wants to be on to the next thing. And at the time that we knew him, he was graduating from Zappos, just being the CEO of Zappos. They just sold to Amazon for $1.2 billion. And Hsieh was trying to figure out what was next. And he decided that he wanted to turn downtown Las Vegas because, Zappos, the call center, is located was in Henderson, Nevada, which is a suburb of Las Vegas. And he wanted to, and accomplished, actually succeeded in buying City Hall in downtown Las Vegas and basically retconning City Hall to become the new offices of Zappos. And his goal wasn't, and he was basically buying up all of these apartments around City Hall in downtown. Now, downtown is different than the Strip. If you've never been to Vegas or if you've only seen Vegas in TV shows, the Strip is usually what you're looking at in TV shows. All of the glitz and all the lights, etc. But downtown is where it used to be the hub back in the 60s. The
crooners.
During the crooner time period, like the Gold Nugget, the Golden Nugget Casino, etc. And that kind of because the Strip became so popular and that's where everybody goes, downtown sort of became dilapidated and, not what it once was. And it's generally in downtown, even though they've renovated and done some really good stuff, downtown is generally what people think of when they think of sort of there's no culture in Vegas.
Well, Vegas is only 100 years old. And
right.
it kind of is a facade. It's like a theme park itself.
Yeah.
It's a facade of a city. It doesn't actually have a real city per se. I mean, it's just mostly smoke and mirrors. It's been entertainment from the beginning.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have any substantive. If you go to an old city like Baltimore, Philadelphia, or even Los Angeles, you've got culture and things that have been there for hundreds of years.
Right.
That you can Kit Carson came through this area, or in this part the steelworkers had a strike here, in the 1800s and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Vegas doesn't really have much of that.
No, Vegas is
buildings are new. It's all
Yeah, it's a destination, like you said, like Disney. And so Hsieh wanted to turn downtown Vegas into something that was more, with a lot more culture, and that's actually the major project that he's working on right now. So what's interesting, though, is if you ever go to Vegas and tour Zappos, which I highly recommend doing, it doesn't matter if you're in the business world or not, go tour Zappos. Everybody there is really happy. I don't know what their personal lives are. I don't know if they're happy at home, but when they get to Zappos, when they're there on the clock, they are happy.
Yeah.
And Zappos does what it can to get everybody's basement needs met while you're at Zappos. Certain things like, if you go to the bathroom and close the stall door, on the back it tells you the services they provide for all of the employees to pick up their dry cleaning and drop it off. Now, it's still a charge, but they provide that service for you so you don't have to figure out how you're going to get your dry cleaning to the dry cleaners after or before work, right? If you're busy. They provide the service of somebody coming in and picking it up for you. The same thing with massages. There are certain days where they have massage available, where a massage truck comes in and you can get on the roster, and for half price you can go get a massage that day. They've got all these little really thoughtful services set up. They've got, coffee shops there. They've got a full bar in pretty much every single department, right?
Yeah.
They just
24-hour cafe.
24-hour cafe,
food.
Everything about Zappos is designed to make it that their employees feel very taken care of, and people are happy. So Zappos is sort of the new, even though they're not like Disney was going to try to create a new city. Zappos instead, or Tony Hsieh at least, he has a vision of renovating what is already there, right? And making it more culturally, maybe highbrow, right? Adding some really interesting cultural elements. But what's really interesting is that this feels like the wave of the future. This feels like where we're going. where we're going is a place where in developed, in the countries that we live in right now, we're going to try to, as you always say, the rising tide raises all ships. It feels like the people who are sort of the mavens and on the cutting edge of where society is going, they're trying to raise all ships by creating an environment where people feel like they have their basic needs met. And once that happens, people are capable of anything. It bumps them up into self-esteem and self-actualization, which means that now they can create these long-term goals, accomplish these goals, feel great about them, and get to higher levels of consciousness, get to higher levels of who they are as an individual.
Yeah.
And really start to, even if they're not a personal development style, they just naturally, organically go on this road of personal development because they're in a context that, accommodates that kind of growth.
Absolutely. And I think that what's exciting about that is it's organically popping up from these different companies. It's organically popping up. And we have some models that show us what this can look like and what it feels like. And there's different varieties. There's different flavors. The Zappos flavor is probably very different than the Disney flavor. And, it's an interesting study and to see where we could be headed in the future for different things. And I think of a friend of ours that was working at Zappos Insights who actually, kind of what you're talking about, he got excited about getting into some self-esteem stuff. He decided I think he resigned his position, and he's now traveling the world doing podcasting and doing some rich media and like almost being like a travel writer, blogger, based on the fact that Zappos was so inspiring from him to be at. That I'm friends with him on Facebook. I follow some of his stuff. And it's really interesting, the different places he goes, stuff he talks about. Not exactly even sure how he's monetizing it right now, but it's really exciting to see him do this and get out there and start really living the life that he's always wanted to live based on the stuff that Zappos taught him and the base needs that were met when he was there.
Right. That's the other thing that Zappos provides is they provide a coach, an in-house coach, which she'll sit with you and ask you what your big game goals are. And if it has nothing to do with Zappos, they're okay with that.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get you to the higher, your higher goal, regardless of whether or not, Zappos is a part of that.
Yeah.
I love that the birds are in the background of this podcast right now. Like seagulls. That makes me happy. Anyway, the what I wanted to sort of wrap up, because I know we're getting to the end of this podcast, but the way that I wanted to sort of wrap this up is, ask yourself, to the listeners, ask yourself what needs are going unmet. And if I could create a life where my quote-unquote Maslow basement needs were met, where could I go?
Yeah.
Like, what would be the next step of my evolution? What would be the next place that I could get to? Could I get to a place where I have that exuberance, an abundance of friendliness? Could I get to a point where I would be now looking at long-term goals of, say, renovating, downtown Vegas and making it a better place to live? Like, how could I use getting my basement needs met as actually a vehicle for bettering the world, leaving the camp better than it was when you got here?
It reminds me, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off. It reminds me of an exercise I do all the time that is really interesting if you do this. I haven't actually asked it with all three Maslow mix, but I'll ask this question to people often. I'll say, okay, let's say whatever your salary is, let's say you make, $75,000 a year because you work wherever. Let me just say that I give you your entire year's salary. So you're not a millionaire. I'm not going to hand you millions of dollars. You didn't win the lottery. But your base salary is going to be covered without you having to go to work every day for 1 year. What would you do? Ask people this question, and it'll be very interesting the responses you get.
Yeah.
You'll get anywhere from a range of, I don't know, I'd probably sit and play video games all day, to I have no clue. I don't know what I'd do with my life. Like, they just don't know.
Or I'd finally build my business.
Or, yeah, the answers are I'll finally build my business, or I'll write my novel, or I'll do whatever it was that's always been stopping me because I've had to constantly go get this need met of making money or whatever.
Right.
It's an interesting question that I'd encourage our listeners to ask some people around you. Ask 10 people this week. Let's just say your base salary is covered for a year. What would you do? It's really insightful. And then ask yourself that.
Yeah.
What would happen if your base salary, whatever it is that you make a year, is just covered without you having to do anything for that?
Right.
What would you be doing with your life? What would you do to expand yourself and maybe it's just play video games. I don't know. But answer that for yourself. I'm guessing our listeners, that's not going to be the case, though. I'm guessing our listeners, it's going to be something that's a little more proactive, something that's a little bit more you've been stopping yourself. You haven't done that because you feel like you've got to get all these other things done first.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and what's so wonderfully inspiring about people like Disney and Hsieh is that they're just people.
Yeah.
Like, they're just people doing their thing. And how can you design or create a life similar to what they have created, which is getting your needs met and helping facilitate other people getting their needs met? Because we're all just people. We're just kind of figuring it out as we go. Nobody's like born into, suddenly just knowing how it all works. So what can you do to get your basement needs met? How can you fashion a life? How can you create or help co-create with somebody else a life that allows you to, be the best version of yourself, to get to that next level of self-esteem and self-actualization? Because you can do it. I mean, we have incredible opportunities in the countries that we live in that are developed.
Yeah.
And even people in developing countries have extraordinary opportunities.
Yeah.
So, what can you do to be the best version of yourself, and what needs are going unmet that might be keeping you from it?
Yeah. Leave us a comment. Come over to our website, personalityhacker.com. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Facebook, it's facebook.com/personalityhacker. Twitter handle is personalityhack, Hack. And let us know. Give us some feedback on this podcast. Let us know what you want to hear about. In the future, also on our website, you can take a free personality test. The summary results are free. Feel free to go over there and take a test and find out your personality and all the different products and services we offer at personalityhacker.com. And this podcast was not sponsored by the Walt Disney Company or Zappos, but it might as well have been. Anywho, I'm Joel Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk to you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.